I'm filmmaker Kevin Hirschner.
And I'm music producer Chris Sangster.
This is Scenes and Songs. Hello, I'm Kevin Hirschner, and you're watching Scenes and Songs, the show that dissects outstanding movie and music pairings.
And I'm Chris Sangster. Each episode, we pick one scene and one song to break down for you. On this episode, we're talking about other people.
When we first had the idea for us to make this show together, we had a lot of long conversations about whether or not we wanted to use films that use music diegetically versus using it non-diegetically. And this film uses the same song, first diegetically and then later in the film non-diegetically, to such genius effect we couldn't resist making an episode on it. And the song the film uses is Drops of Jupiter.
That's right, and you've probably heard the biggest hit from the band called Train hundreds of times before thanks to its place in the pop music lexicon. But I guarantee you've never heard it used quite like it's used in this film. So let's head on over to the screening room so Kevin can set up the film for you.
Chris Kelly's Other People was released on September 9th, 2016. The independent dramedy is loosely autobiographical, based on the events surrounding the death of the writer-director's mother to cancer in 2009. The film's main character, David, is based on Kelly, a comedy writer who is most well known for his contributions at Saturday Night Live, including a season as the show's co-head writer. At the time the story takes place, David is a 29-year-old struggling comedy writer who leaves New York City and returns home to Sacramento, California to take care of his terminally ill mother. To make matters worse, David is also dealing with an inability to fully connect with his sisters, the disillusion of a 5-year relationship with his boyfriend, and his father's struggle to accept his sexual orientation 10 years after coming out as gay. The story takes place over the last year of David's mother's life, as the family attempts to come to terms with their grim reality. Since many of the characters were at least initially inspired by Kelly's real-life family members, it was important to the director not to portray any character as the quote-unquote bad guy. Even David's father, who, despite his discomfort with David's sexuality, comes across as a man who loves his son and is doing his best to cope with the impending death of his wife. The antagonist of the film is the situation. Cancer is obviously the overarching negative situation that the entire family battles, but for David, just being stuck in Sacramento is almost as negative of a situation. This suburban hell of Northern California represents everything David resents about his life and himself. David, as the stand-in for the writer-director, is written as someone who is funny and charismatic, but also at times bitter and selfish. His bitterness is apparent from the very beginning of the film, and we're able to understand why a man who for a long period of his life had to hide his true identity might not be super thrilled about returning to the location that holds these bad memories. Furthermore, David aspires to a life of creative fulfillment and cultural enrichment, and the Sacramento he sees is not exactly one of high culture. The filmmakers represent this perceived cultural dearth with scenes of David's well-meaning but ignorant family members, shots and shots of chain restaurants and strip malls, and a running musical gag, the recurring appearance on the radio of the early 2000s adult contemporary song Drops of Jupiter. David hears the song play 5 different times in the film, and each playing of the song, which David views as schmaltzy melodrama, haunts David a little bit more. The final time David hears the song, he is en route in his father's minivan to a chain grocery store in order to purchase laxatives for his sick mother. It's the encapsulation of everything David hates about his current life, and he is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But Kelly is adamant that he, as the filmmaker, does not necessarily hold the same views as his protagonist. In an interview with Filmmaker magazine, Kelly said, "To me, there's a difference between the main character looking down on something and the movie looking down on something. The filmmaker understands that for his protagonist to find peace, he must be willing to put himself in the shoes of other people. Although David understands this intellectually, he is not yet able to put this to practice. In fact, the title of the film comes from a moment when David laments to a friend, "This all just feels like something that happens to other people." Throughout the film, David seems to feel like this whole ordeal is just a nightmare that he'll wake up from at any moment. He has enough on his plate already, and this isn't something he feels he should have to deal with right now. It's something that happens to other people. At the same time, David is so wrapped up in his own head that he never really stops to think about how the other people in his family are affected by this tragedy. At one point, David's younger sister even calls David out for not recognizing that other people are sad too. But the lesson doesn't fully cement itself for David until the final scene he shares with his mother. In a heartbreaking moment that leaves both the characters and the audience in tears, David's mother encourages him that if he should ever miss her, to just come home and see his sisters. She'll be right there in their faces. The very next and final scene of the film shows the immediate aftermath of David's mother's death. And the soundtrack kicks in with the very song that has haunted David, but this time played in earnest as the family grieves together. Now let's head over to the studio so Chris can break down the song for you.
The song that is brilliantly and devastatingly used throughout the film Other People is Drops of Jupiter, Tell Me, by Train. The song was written by the band with the lyrics penned by lead singer Pat Monahan. It was recorded at Ocean Way, Nashville, and Southern Tracks Recording, Atlanta. It was released in 2001 on the band's sophomore record titled Drops of Jupiter. It peaked at number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and won 2 Grammy Awards, Best Rock Song and Best Instrumental Arrangement Accompanying Vocalists. It was produced by Brendan O'Brien and features the signature string sound of Paul Buckmaster. Paul Buckmaster's legendary career as a string arranger includes stints arranging for the likes of David Bowie, Elton John, the Rolling Stones, Carly Simon, Stevie Nicks, Taylor Swift, and many, many, many others. This guy is a legend. You've definitely heard his string arrangements. I guarantee it. The lushness and cinematic vibes that you get from Drops of Jupiter really come from this string sound, are really due to Buckmaster's string arrangement. It weaves in and out beautifully around Monahan's vocals and complements the otherwise straightforward rock arrangement so perfectly. This song is built from very simple building blocks. It's based around basically 3 very simple chords, C major, G major, and F major, and other than the lush strings and the pretty catchy piano riff, it really is an exercise in restraint. Nobody is there to show off, nobody is there to showboat, everyone is there to serve the lyric. Everything is there to make sure the lyric is heard and understood and appreciated as best it can be. Even the strings, as gorgeous as they are, serve the lyric beautifully. But the real story of this song is of its creation. Pat Monahan was on tour with Train in support of their debut album in 1998 while his mother was dying of cancer. This was before times of cell phones, so Monahan stopped at every payphone he could find along the tour to call in and check on his mom. Now, this is eerily similar to the story of Chris Kelly, who had to put his budding artistic career on hold to move home and care for his ill mother. Now, Monahan still toured, obviously, but to me, it was obvious he made every sacrifice he possibly could make to be near his mother in the last days of her life. And unfortunately, she passed away in December of 1998. Now, dealing with this and coming off the tour, Train had a daunting task to write their sophomore record. It's a daunting task for any band, but obviously one that had extra weight placed upon it because of Monahan's personal struggles. After they finished the tour, Train wrote many songs for their sophomore record and presented them to the record label. But as record labels are wont to do, they said they didn't hear a single and told him to go back and try again. Now, obviously, Monahan was disheartened from this news. He was still trying to cope with the death of his mother, and he just heard from his label that they didn't like any of his songs that much. So in order to deal with this and process all of this, he went back home to his hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania. And one night, while sleeping in his childhood bed, his mother came to him in a dream. She was floating through space and time, flying through the planets with bits of planet dust in her hair, to come to him to tell him to enjoy his life and to live it to the fullest. When he awoke from the dream, he had the lyric, and now she's back in the atmosphere, stuck in his head. An hour later, the song was done. He played an early version of the song to studio executive Don Einer, who reassured a then skeptical Monahan that the song was in fact a hit, a Grammy song in his words. And boy was it ever. Now, some of the song's lyrics are deeply personal for Pat Monahan. Specifically the one, "Did you fall for a shooting star, one without a permanent scar?" This is him asking his mother, "Did you forget about me on your travels?" He is the one with the permanent scar. He has a permanent scar on his chin from a car accident he was in when he was a teenager. Another one that I really like is the "that heaven was overrated" line. And this is his mother's way of telling him, don't worry about the afterlife. Don't worry about what happens after you die. Focus on life and living it to the fullest. And even the infamous soy latte line from The Bridge has a personal connection. Apparently at the time, Monahan didn't drink coffee, but everyone else in the band was obsessed with soy lattes. So he put that "best soy latte that you ever had" line in the song just as a little rib at his bandmates, which is great. But the truly personal idea presented in this song is about Monahan's own journey to cope with his mother's passing. He is quoted as saying, "It was an obvious connection between me and my mother. Drops of Jupiter was as much about me being on a voyage and trying to find out who I am. The best thing we can do about loss of love is to find ourselves through it." This message feels so applicable to Chris Kelly's story and to the story of his lead character, David. To learn from loss is at the heart of the song, and I also believe it's at the heart of the film. And that's what makes this pairing all the more powerful and impactful. So now let's head over to the Nook so we can break down that pairing even further. So although this song has a very, very personal meaning to Pat Monahan, one of the strengths of the song to me is the ambiguity of the lyrics. So obviously for Pat Monahan, it's about his mother dying of cancer. And for Chris Kelly, it probably also means a similar thing. But for someone else, this song could be about something else entirely. You know, it could be about a relationship. It could be about self-actualization. It could be about many things. And I think that's one of the reasons why this song kind of persists and lasts and is so memorable, and everybody knows it. And whether you like it or love it, notwithstanding, you know it. And I think that's a reason why.
Yeah, and there's a great line in the movie that we were cracking up when we kept hearing it on replay. On the one of the last times that David hears the song played, it's Delilah playing herself, and she sends the song out to Alan in Iraq.
Right. It absolutely cracked us up. It's so funny.
It's so funny that just like just the way they use the song to just haunt him.
Yeah.
In a way that if he wasn't going through this circumstance, he would have no issue with the song.
Right.
By Delilah going out to Alan in Iraq. But it also shows how, I'm assuming Alan in Iraq does not have cancer.
Right, exactly.
But he's going through this very difficult time.
Right.
And this song could be really positive for him.
Exactly. And this song, it could be taken non-religiously or it could be taken religiously. It has a lot of kind of metaphysical kind of lyrics to it. And so I think those things are very open to interpretation. And even when you get really like deep down into the nitty gritty of the lyricism here, it can be taken in many ways. Like, is the mother talking to him, or is he talking to his mother? Is she giving him life advice, or is he asking her questions? I think if you kind of ignore the pronouns for a little bit, and especially the verses, you can kind of see it both ways. You can kind of see the communication going both ways. That whole that does tie bow and reminds me that there's room to grow. All of these lyrics, like to me, it's not specifically about his mother doing these things. It's about what she has taught him in her death. But that's just my interpretation. There could be many interpretations, and there's value in all of those interpretations. And that's one of the great things about music and art to me is that when it leaves the creator's hand, it doesn't belong to the creator anymore. It now belongs to the audience and the people that are enjoying it and consuming it. And all of their interpretations are just as valid to me as the creator's original intention.
And even that being said, I mean, I'm sure, we don't know what was truly in Pat Monahan's mind or heart when he was coming up with all of this and exactly what he thinks about everything. But I do feel like he's probably wise enough to know when he set out to write this that it could be interpreted in a number of different ways. Even we talked about like religious versus non-religious. he seems to really come at it from a pretty agnostic point of view.
For sure.
Which I think is one of the reasons that it allows so many people to pull value from it.
Absolutely.
He's not preaching. He's sharing his little tidbit of what he has, and reflecting on that and putting it in the music. And kind of like you were saying about there's value in all of these different interpretations, and you could pull that metaphor out and say there's value in all the different ways that people can interpret tragic events. And the scene that we thought in this film that really summed that up was the scene when the entire family, except for the mom, who's noticeably absent,
right,
they go to the Applebee's,
right,
and they're having this conversation where the dad kind of explains, hey, what's happening to mom is that her body is breaking down. Her body is preparing to die. Which then kind of devolves into this conversation where David gets upset because his dad refuses to ask about his boyfriend, which he, obviously the dad has a lot of issues with David being gay. And David is very upset about this, which then turns into a separate conversation where his sisters call him out for never asking how they're doing. And
it's pretty brutal.
accusing him of being selfish.
Yeah.
And at this point in the story, David still can't see his sister's valid points. But so the very next scene, it cuts to, they're all in Dad's minivan.
So
Dad's driving down the street past the strip malls, and of course on the radio blaring is Drops of Jupiter.
Yeah, it's hilarious to me because we get to see each of the family members' reaction to this song being played, and to me it kind of mirrors the way that each of them are dealing with this tragic situation in their lives. First you see the dad, who is just straight rocking out, loves the song, knows every word, and is like fully into it, because throughout the film you see him kind of just like ignoring the elephant in the room and trying to not really, I mean, not accept it, but he just tries to deal with it by harping on other things in life and not focusing on the cancer that is taking his wife from him. And so he kind of just focuses on, oh, how's your friend? Or you got a big test coming up at school, all these kind of mundane things, like this mundane pop song that he's just rocking out to in this scene.
But like kind of by the same topic of how you could interpret things different way, I think if this story was told from the dad's point of view, I think his point of view would be that it is very difficult for him and he's having a hard time, but he is, in his mind, he needs to be strong for his children.
Yeah.
And it's played by American treasure Bradley Whitford, too. He just plays a great dad character in it, and it's so real and it's so effective in that way. But like you said, the way he is reacting to the song is exactly the same way he is reacting to the situation. And the same thing, the sisters are the same way. The older sister, she's very mellow and very controlled and very even, which is kind of how we always see her. And then the younger sister, we kind of see her, she's kind of like, the hippy dippy stoner sister. And she's kind of letting the music wash over. She's kind of escaping into the music.
Yeah. She's lost. She's getting lost in it. She's escaping in the music. And then we get the most awesomely hilarious shot of the whole film of David, who is, so minivans have the 3 rows, right? So dad's in the front, no one's in the front passenger seat. The sisters are in the captain's chairs in the middle, right? And then David is sitting in the middle seat of the back row by himself. And he just has this look of just complete annoyance.
Losing his mind.
Just losing his freaking marbles listening to this song for like the 4th or 5th time in this movie. And how many times he's probably heard it in his life at this point. And his whole family's rocking out in front of him, and he just wants to be anywhere but in that minivan at that point in time.
And you could make an argument that the metaphor is that he's stuck in the middle of the back seat, just like he's stuck in Sacramento, just like he's stuck at this phase in his life.
Yeah.
And his frustration, he literally looks like he's just about to explode. His face is all red, and
he's just bottling everything in, and everything is just building up pressure, building more and more, ready to explode. And it sets it up that a few scenes later, when we see David, we see David pulling up at the grocery store.
Right.
It's the last time we hear the music diegetically, as in he can hear it and understand it, as opposed to non-diegetically, in which only the audience can hear. And at that point, he finally just absolutely loses his mind. I mean, the song only plays for 2 or 3 chords before he just literally punches the stereo to turn it off. And then even when he goes into the grocery store,
right, it's on.
Yeah,
it's on in the grocery store.
It's in the mix.
Right.
You can hear it. You can barely hear it, but you can hear it.
But it's there as he is breaking down on the medicine aisle looking for the laxatives, as he's just finally letting it all flow out of him, right? He's just been bottling it up this whole time, and in this scene in the grocery store, he's just, he's finally pulled that plug and just letting all the emotions come out. And very quietly, what's there to soundtrack this is, of course, Drops of Jupiter playing over the loudspeaker of the grocery store, just to haunt him, in his worst moment, just haunt him a little more.
Not just the music that you hear. You could also hear just the terrible hum of the fluorescent lights. You can hear the refrigerator. Shout out to the sound team on putting that all together, of just making his mundane horror come to life.
Totally, yeah. Suburban horror right there, yeah.
And that's why, the song works for a number of technical reasons. It was a totally ubiquitous pop song in the early 2000s. It's the type of song that you have heard on the radio a million times. You will hear it a million more times. And it's also, it's very fitting that Sacramento, the story is set 10, 15 years after the song came out.
Right,
and so, of course, Sacramento would be behind the times compared to cool, hip New York, where David lives and where he wants to live.
Yeah.
But also, it's hearkening him back to these times where he was a young, lonely, closeted kid.
Right.
So you can understand why maybe he doesn't want to be reminded of this time in his life. And then the other reason that it works really well technically in this movie is that the song is pretty much instantly recognizable from those first few chords. Like I said, that time when he hears it, when he's about to go into the laxatives, I don't think it even gets to the lyrics.
No.
You just hear those chords.
Yeah.
Play those chords for us.
It's super recognizable. I think most people would notice it just by this, right? Like that's pretty much the basic form of the intro of the song. And I mean, it's really simple chords and all that, but it's pretty recognizable. It's got a kind of melody within the chords, but it's real simple, and it's really catchy and really recognizable. And you just hear that ba 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 ba. Oh yeah, Drops of Jupiter by Train. Hey, how we doing?
And the type of thing
you just know it.
That will haunt David.
Yeah, it is kind of like, it is an earworm, right? And that can be positive or negative, right? You can get a song stuck in your head and be all about it, or you can get a song stuck in your head and absolutely hate it and rue the day you ever heard it for the first time. So, I think David's kind of on the latter end of that spectrum here, but it is a testament to that it is a well-made song. It is a well-crafted song.
Oh, definitely. And so, we talked about some of those 2 reasons why it works well technically. And then obviously the reason that it works so well, just from an emotional,
thematic
reason, is that the story is also about Pat Monahan's mother, who died of cancer.
Right.
We didn't actually when we picked this episode, we did not know that was what Drops of Jupiter was written about. At least I didn't.
I didn't either. No, I've heard this song a million times. I legitimately love the song and like Train a lot, but I didn't know that was what the song was about.
Yeah, and when we started doing research, that was the first thing I read when I go on the Wikipedia page for the song. And I was just like, wow, this was so genius and so perfect that they picked this song for the movie.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it's incredibly powerful the way that it all comes together in this film. And I think that the parallel between Chris Kelly and Pat Monahan isn't super evident, but if you do know it, it adds that extra layer of depth and meaning to to the story and to the image and the sound and everything that's combining on screen at the time.
Which is why Chris Kelly said that the song was always Drops of Jupiter. I read the script for this film. Mm-hmm. The song in the script is Drops of Jupiter.
Right. He said that when he was actually living this experience, when he was at home in Sacramento living with his dying mother, that song was, he heard a lot. He heard it on the radio and it stuck with him. It stuck in his head. You know, it stuck out from that period of time. And so when he went to make a film about this, he knew that had to be the song.
Yeah, and he did, when he was doing press for the movie, he did an AMA on Tumblr. And he said that early on in the process of making the film, they reached out to Train and they were totally on board right from the beginning. They loved the idea and gave them full credence to use the film.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And to be completely honest about how nerdy I am about this podcast, I spent a good 2 to 3 hours looking through Chris Kelly's Tumblr when I found out about it. And here are the top 5 things that I learned on my deep dive of Chris Kelly's Tumblr.
The countdown may begin.
So to start out, I read mostly his Tumblr of when he was actually going through David's experience. So around 2008, 2009, when he was back home in Sacramento, I focused on that. And so here are the things I found out.
5.
All right, number 5. Chris Kelly's ex-boyfriend's name is Kevin. Chris and Kevin. I'll let you guys figure that one out.
4.
Okay, number 4. He has a lot of posts on his Tumblr about his strained relationship with going to the gym and with exercise in general. So I feel like he put that subtle thing about the gym membership his dad gave him and telling him to go to the boxing classes in because he just legitimately hates going to the gym, which I thought was funny.
3.
Number 3. On September 18th, 2009, he literally wrote it out, a conversation with a friend from high school where we, quote, both think we are talking about a different horrible part of my life. And it's literally the interaction outside the supermarket where the friend thinks he's talking about him coming out and Chris Kelly thinks he's talking about his mom having cancer, or David in this case. And it's literally like a transcription of that. He kind of punches it up a bit for the movie, but it's basically like that thing happened to him in real life, which I was just like, wow, that's A, horrible, but like B, cool that he turned it into this memorable scene in his movie, you know?
Which apparently, at the end of the scene, you know, he gets offered the Redbox movie as long as he doesn't pick any new releases.
Right. Yeah.
Which that's not on the Tumblr page.
Right.
But it is, apparently that also happened to him, but this was when Blockbuster was around and somebody actually told him, you can get it, I'll rent you a movie as long as it's not a new release.
Yeah, so he kind of combined those two real life experiences into this one super memorable and super cringeworthy scene. It's really great.
2.
So number 2, on a much sadder note, but still super interesting, Chris Kelly's mother passed away on September 27th, 2009. And September 27th is the date that David posits to his friend when they're kind of having this back and forth about what's going to happen. He posits that, will September 27th just always suck? You know, he just pulls a seemingly random date out of the air to say, you know, what's random date will just always suck for me. But September 27th is the day that Chris Kelly's mom actually passed away, which is, you know, a nice little tribute to her, I think.
1.
And then on a similar theme, the top thing I learned was that Chris Kelly did a whole other Tumblr during the last year of his mother's life called Reasons I Love My Mother. And it's daily posts about why he loves his mom. And it actually goes through 365 days of them, and actually goes through the end of her life. She passes away in the middle of him doing this, and he continues and finishes out the year afterwards. And it will make you cry just as hard as the film will. It's a devastating but really, really powerful read. And I just want to read one that I thought was really, really impactful and really important for the film. And it was just a few days before she passed in real life. And he said, reason number 70, because this is just the worst, and I don't know how she's doing it. And because even though this has always been my worst nightmare, her letting me help her through this probably produced some of my best memories with her. And that's just a really, really, really deep and powerful thought. But one that I think is really at the crux of the heart of the film.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And you know, the character of David goes on this journey and learns all these valuable lessons. And you might say he learns them in spite of the situation, but you really should say he's learning them because of the situation, going through this traumatic event. I've heard Chris Kelly say that he was like, hey, this was a terrible situation. I wish it hadn't happened to me, but it happened, and I'm going to learn from it and be productive. And that's what the film does. It shows how David is going to learn from that, and it shows it through these seemingly mundane activities in the last year of his mother's life.
Right, and it's soundtracked by this seemingly mundane pop song the whole time. And then, you know, as we learn later in the movie, it's anything but both the small moments and the mundane pop song. You know, there's so much more to that than he sets you up for an hour and a half to believe, you know, before the ending of the film.
Yeah, and he said in several interviews that one of the reasons he wanted to make this movie is because growing up, he said he was a fan of movies about people who had cancer.
Right,
He said he had seen a bunch of them growing up, and he said when he was actually going through that, he didn't feel like what he had seen being depicted on screen. He didn't feel like it was an accurate portrayal. Mm-hmm. And he said while he was going through this whole moment, he was waiting for the moment that you see in movies where he learns the big valuable life lesson, while the big sweeping music comes in and everything becomes clear to him. And he said that just never came.
You can see how he puts that into the character of David a bit. Although obviously David is not an exact representation of Chris Kelly's actual persona, I think that he does kind of imbue the character of David with a bit of what you're talking about, in that he is waiting for this moment of release. He's waiting for this moment of realization that never really comes. You know, we have that whole scene with him and his friend where his friend, who has been through a very, very similar experience to him, you know, having to come out and then having his mother die. Like, he's been through these very similar things. And he's telling him the whole story about the birch tree, how his mom told him about birch trees, and how now every time he sees a birch tree, he thinks of his mom. And that's this, like, you know, that was his big moment that he got. And David is so kind of jealous of this, right? And he's like searching for this the whole time.
Searching for his birch tree
Searching
moment.
for his birch tree, right.
Yeah, and he kind of keeps coming up short.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole movie. He literally even asks his mom what she thinks of birch trees.
That's right. Yeah. He
and
like
she just
kind of goads her into it, but she's like, what?
She just kind of brushes it off.
Yeah.
But similar, I think a lot of moviegoers who are looking for this type of film or watching this type of film, they're looking for things.
Yeah.
They're looking for the comforts of this genre. I mean, there's so many different genres, but, you know, horror movie, action movie, melodramatic sad movies, and most of them have kind of these touchstones, these comfort foods. A lot of the times it comes in music. How many horror movies have you seen where the music is what makes it creepy or not creepy?
Absolutely.
And I read an interview recently with horror director Ari Aster, who said that for fans of the genre, these movies are like comfort food to them. They have certain expectations, and the best thing you can do is to subvert their expectations, which is exactly what Chris Kelly does in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's no score. There's no big sweeping strings. There's no epic piano ballad. There's none of these
cues to tell you how to feel.
Exactly. Typical emotional cues that music sets up in movie. He completely does away with all of that and replaces it with Drops of Jupiter, which is like, sounds, when I just say it out loud, sounds insane, but it's beautiful. It is absolutely gorgeous the way he does it.
And from a thematic standpoint and from a story standpoint, what it does is it causes all this emotional tension for us as the audience to build and build throughout the film, where we are waiting for that release.
Right.
And it's not coming in the same way that David is waiting for that release.
Exactly.
And it's just not coming. I mean, it's playing over the loudspeakers, over the radio. It's a nuisance to David. And I mean, it's funny to us as the audience, but it's kind of a nuisance to us too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think depending on where, you know, Train's kind of one of those bands, I think, that really you you either like and respect their music, or you think they're just super cheesy. You know, there's not a lot of like in the middle Train fans. It's either like you like them, you think they're cool, or you're like, that's pretty cheesy music. It's not really my cup of tea. But, and you know, wherever you fall on that line, I think I kind of fall more on the Train is good, and Kevin probably falls a little more on the Train is cheesy. Mine, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we both can realize the effectiveness of the song and the movie pairing. And even if you think this is a cheesy pop song, like, watch the end of the film and don't be devastated. I dare you.
After doing all, watching the film, doing the research on Train and Pat Monahan, which I knew hardly anything about before doing research for this episode, I have a totally different appreciation for them. I was certainly, personality-wise, I'm much more similar to David.
Right.
I'm kind of allergic to cheese and over sentimentality.
Yeah. I love a bit of cheese.
but Pat Monahan wrote the song about his mother dying of cancer. How can you be offended by that? Or be mad about that?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so yes, I mean, I have a greater appreciation of that song because of the film.
And that's the whole point, right? Like that's kind of what this movie is about. Everyone has their own perspectives.
Putting yourself in other people's shoes.
Exactly. The title of the film is Other People. You know, his sister says that great line about other people are sad too, David. You know, like someone is always going through something. You're not the only person going through this thing. And everyone's opinions and ways of dealing with the tragedy, should be valid and taken seriously. And I think obviously we see David just be super selfish throughout this whole film. And it kind of like Drops of Jupiter kind of is this nuisance the whole time until the very end when we finally do get the big musical emotional release moment of the film, and it's Drops of Jupiter in full blast.
Yeah, and one of my favorite lines in the film that just like brings you to your knees when you're watching it, kind of backs up this point of everyone has their own perspective and they can be equally valid. Is David and his mother are laying in bed, and David says, I'm paraphrasing, but more or less that he wishes he had enough time to just take his mom on a trip so she could see the whole world before she passes away. And her response is that she gets to see her whole world at dinner that night. And it's it's so poetic and it's so well done. And according to Chris Kelly, that was more or less word for word taken from something his mom had actually said to him while she was dying. And David is not a bad person for trying to say, I want to take you on a trip and show you the world.
No.
And his mom is not a bad person for not wanting to do that because what she has is good enough for her.
Right.
And David learning that lesson is part of that, brings this whole story together.
Yeah. I mean, it's super powerful stuff. And I think the thing for me that really, really hit home and really tied the whole movie together for me was when David gets his metaphorical birch tree. And so the mom tells him that whenever you miss me, come home and see your sisters, because I see myself in all of my children. So if you want to see me, come home and visit your sisters, because you'll see me in your sisters. And we have this really touching moment right at the end of the film where they're all lined up. He kind of comes into their room. They're all laying there together, and they kind of lock eyes, him and his younger sister. And, he kind of realizes that he does have this birch tree. He has gotten his own version of this moment of realization, even though it's not what he was expecting. And to me, the thing that takes that concept to the next level is Drops of Jupiter. And what I mean by that is it's been used time and time again in the movie as this kind of nuisance, but then it becomes the emotional center of the film. When it finally comes in and she's just passed away, and the song comes in with the line, now that she's back in the atmosphere, and it's in full quality for the first time. It's it's being played non-diegetically, and so it's really, really impactful. And to me, that song then also becomes a birch tree, because he's heard this song through this year of living at home, caring for his mother. That song will always remind him of that time. I think that is true for Chris Kelly. I'm sure that's true for Pat Monahan. And so I think this song could be a birch tree for all three of those people, and furthermore, for the audience, for us. I know I will always think of this movie now when I hear this song.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Scenes and Songs. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Scenes and Songs. Subscribe on YouTube, like on Facebook, and for audio only, subscribe wherever podcasts are sold.
To get in contact with us, send us an email at scenes_songs@gmail.com. That's scenes, AMPERSAND, songs@gmail.com. Check out our next episode where we break down Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, featuring the song Cat People, Putting Out Fire by David Bowie and Giorgio Moroder.